Great. I really look forward to today's discussion on the AV in cities. After almost 15 years of this discussion, I have to say the prior wave triggered so much effort and momentum, excitement. The cities preparing for it, everyone talk about it. And then the technology was not mature and we got disillusioned, right? Today, I think different. AI is here at scale. Right. I'm so glad to have Edwin, Katrin, and Matt join us to really have a deeper discussion on this topic. Apologize for Xiaodi and Sampriti. They're the victim of the whole disruption of the airline industry. Just stuck, couldn't join us today. But before I invite each of you to give your remark, let me start with some, hopefully get something here, desk here. The first one to show is, this is just in last year, there's about a 10-fold increase in RoboTaxi ridership by Waymo in California in general, specifically in San Francisco. But I do want to mention one thing, that is the empty driving, right? If you look at the green bar is the driving with the miles with passenger, and the other two are the either empty or en route to pick up, right? So add together, the deadheading is about 50%, right? This roughly on par with Uber, Lyft. Similar to that, right? So that's one key question and potential concern for would AV contribute to solving congestion problem, right? So that's one. The second one is there's important distinction between RoboTaxi versus Uber and Lyft versus RoboTaxi versus private car, right? Can we tackle RoboTaxi? That's about $30 billion market. And versus can we tackle private car? That's $1.5 trillion. Particularly, can we really shake this private ownership, car ownership paradigm in the United States, right? Is this within the realm of reality here? I would like to hear your comments on this, right? Just have some ballpark in the cost per mile. Human taxi about $2.5 per mile, AV taxi $2 per mile, and private car, look at the whole life cycle, it's about 90 cents per mile. So when are we going to include that? Last thing I want to talk about is this complex business ecosystem, as Zhao pointed out, and also a policy ecosystem, right? So that's a few things I want as a background before I start. Okay, yeah, so now, I don't want to start from you, right? You're a graduate from MIT, and you did several things in Ford, many things, and then started May Mobility. Tell us your motivation, why you want to start May Mobility, and what's your kind of a dream outcome of doing that, right?
Hey, everybody. So I'm Ed, I'm founder, CEO of May. And we are, just to give you a little sense of what May is, we're one of the only AV companies in the United States that operates without safety drivers. We've done driver in to driver out 3 times across 3 states in the US. How many of you knew that? Mm-hmm. All right, that's going to my marketing team. But why did I start this? So I actually had some great opportunities working with Ford and then with Toyota, but ultimately wanted to start my own company because I had my own view of what an AV company should be. And it actually addresses a lot of the things that you were just talking about. Really, you know, in a nutshell, our vision is to outcompete personal car ownership. Right? Every time we deploy a vehicle, the challenge that I give to my team is I want calling a May vehicle to be better than going into your garage and driving the car that's sitting in there. And that means removing friction at every point along the way, reducing wait time, and of course, giving people their time back.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Katrin, you're the president of the autonomous driving and mobility team from Volkswagen. You set up the team in 2023. Right. Tell us your ambition, or Volkswagen's ambition in America, and also give us a sense of the contrast between your effort, the Moist effort in Hamburg versus here in Austin and Los Angeles.
Yeah, actually, I'm part of Volkswagen since a longer time already, and I'm working on autonomous driving technology for Volkswagen since 2016 already. So it's been a longer time, but we only started our activities here in the US in 2022. When I came over and built the team here on site in the US. Foundation is, of course, what we are doing in the headquarters in Germany right now. And we are a global company, and also our autonomous driving efforts are very global. So we are collaborating with Moya, as you're referencing. They are a ride pooling company. which is supplying ride pooling services in the city of Hamburg in Germany, meaning pooling different parties in one car. And that's ultimately also one of the modalities we want to put our robotaxis in, deploying the ID bus, which we are using as a base vehicle, integrating the Mobileye technology, also developing a turnkey solution for operator enablement, meaning that we are developing the technology to also bring the fleets into services and also maintain them over time, and then deploy them in different services across Europe as well as in the US. So the approach is global. It's the same product for Europe and also the US. But also now we are building the team and also the operations here in the US to deploy the technology here on US ground as well. But it's the same product, and that's our vision also, that we have to bring costs down. It has to be a global product that is deployed across the ocean.
Very nice. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Matt, you are the general counsel of Nutonomy, a spin-off from MIT on autonomous vehicle, and you've been writing quite a bit as a law professor now on regulating robotaxi. Give us your angle on this.
Well, it's great to be back in Massachusetts, because this was the first city on the eastern seaboard that got automated driving. So in 2016, when I was the GC of Nutonomy, I helped negotiate the memorandum of understanding that are still good law, I believe, today with many people in this room. Chris Carter, who was then at the City of Boston, Jane Lappin, who is at Toyota Research Institute, played an important role in those conversations. Stephanie Pollack was at MassDOT at the time, and this was back when Governor Baker was in power and Mayor Walsh was in power, and we came up with a regulatory system here in Massachusetts that I think was really unique around the country, in that it involved a very hands-on approach by the regulators and a scaled approach to risk management. So we started in the Boston Seaport and then gradually expanded. A lot has changed since 2016, as you know, John's history in the beginning and Jinhua's remarks at the beginning of this panel revealed. I mean, we really did go through an automated driving winter where people started to, at least in the media, seriously doubt whether the technology was going to come to market. But as that slide that you showed about Waymo's deployment revealed, I think today the technology is real, and I think today cities, states, and the federal government are starting to face questions other than just, is this technology safe enough to get on the road? So what I'm working on now in my research with Bryant Walker-Smith, who's another law professor that I bet many folks in this room are familiar with, is starting to ask the questions about non-safety issues. So those are not just the basic externality questions like congestion, wear and tear on infrastructure, emissions, but they're also questions about market structure. Are we really going to turn over a large portion of the transportation system to one or a small number of private companies? And what protections should cities and states put in place to make sure that competition is encouraged and that consumers aren't taken advantage of? I mean, for a lot of people, having a car gives them a sense of personal freedom. And if you're going to tell people to give up their personal car, because I think I share that goal with Ed, they need to know that a large private corporation isn't going to take advantage of their lack of other options. So that's the conversation that Bryant and I are starting to introduce.
Wonderful. So we have the three distinct perspectives here, right? I want to guide the conversation in the following order. Start a little bit on the technology. I'd like to hear what's the frontier now on technology. Then move to the economics. Really, can we drive down the cost per mile? How the AV will work with the taxi company, with transit on private car. And then get to the system design question, business system, and then governance issue on this, right? So on technology, Edwin, let me start from you. So we moved from this kind of a symbolic determinist process from perception, planning, control, etc., to hybrid system where at some part we introduce machine learning, to the full end-to-end model, then to today this foundational model, reasoning model. So we have this evolution on this. Give us a sense of where we are. Where's the front line of technology innovation here?
Yeah, I think basically every AV company that's still in the game has migrated to data-driven AI-based systems, just as a level setting. But there are some interesting differences across the AV companies. Tesla, maybe famously, is pushing for camera-based end-to-end systems. And by the way, I'll clarify that when people say end-to-end, oftentimes they're conflating two different ideas. One is the idea that you can use data to drive your learning through backprop. Everybody agrees that that's a good idea. The second idea is that, oh, there's just one big network, and you just trust the network to learn everything without imposing any structure on it. Tesla is very much all in on the one massive network that we're just going to learn end-to-end. And the problem with this is that the data requirements for that are really, really high. You've got Tesla, which has the most impressive data collection pipeline in the industry, and they still can't prevent their vehicles from committing these gaffes. It'll be brilliant 1 minute and then run a red light or drive into a concrete barrier the next minute. It's exactly what you expect from a neural network that's under constrained in its training data. Where you see the rest of the industry, some of them are migrating from very modular systems with little soda pipes of information flowing from one module to another, and those information bottlenecks historically limit the performance of the next module downstream. So everybody's trying to fatten up those interconnections and passing embeddings from the tracking system to the prediction system, passing embeddings from there on downstream. And that's really where the whole world is going. This is a long answer. But I think what the analogy that I like best is that in a lot of ways, all of this architecture looks like ChatGPT 3.5. Right? These are incredibly data-hungry methods with very poor generalization performance in general. And if there's this classic example, if you ask ChatGPT 3.5 2 years ago, how many R's are there in strawberry? It gets it wrong. Right? Why? Because in its training data, nobody bothered to say, by the way, did you know that there are 3 R's in strawberry? Nobody wrote that down because you can look at the word strawberry and see that there are 3 R's. But if you ask ChatGPT 3.5, it'll say there are 2. This is exactly the kind of defect that you see from a lot of traditional AV systems, that they find themselves in an unusual situation, we call them edge cases, and then the vehicle does something dumb. Now, in the large language model space, the solution was to introduce reasoning capabilities, chain of thought, things like that. In the AV space, people want to do that, but in general, those methods are really, really slow. And so this is, I think, the frontier for autonomous vehicles, is to incorporate those deep reasoning models that allow the vehicle to generalize better in unseen cases. And a little plug, I'll circle around to it later, that's what we do.
Good. Yeah, indeed, we'll come back to you on this point, right? Katrin, so Volkswagen kind of championed this global automobile ecosystem, right? You have generally the similar core and then a slight variation in small market on this. When we move to this AV stack, do you see the trend evolving to literally have to have a US stack, China stack, and a European and the rest of the world stack? Or where do you see this thing going?
Right now, we are approaching that question that we are basically focusing right now on Europe and US, also mainly to regulatory reasons. So we are developing our stack together with the company Mobileye from Israel, which are probably basically doing something very similar what Ed just described. But we are able to integrate the technology in the market of Europe as well as in the US, and our system is being built on the regulatory framework of both of those areas, which is basically we can combine both of them that pretty good in our product. China is a little bit different and more difficult. We decided not to focus on China with our technology right now, but focus very much on Europe and US, and the stack and also the product is being built in Europe, and this is something we are also wanting to position in the market, that it's possible also for European companies to have a stack and a whole product that is available in Europe and built in Europe as well. And this is what we are bringing to the US as well, to also, of course, promote our technology here in the US.
Right. Good. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Matt, on the regulation related to technology, I want to ask you a little bit. Right. One thing I don't know is you can comment on when we move from this more symbolic structured model to this foundational model, Gen AI type of model. It seems that the control human has vis-a-vis this model is kind of gradually losing. We have a much harder time to offer, for example, safety guarantee with a probabilistic nature of this foundational model. That's right. What does this impose a challenge from regulation? Yeah, or broadly on the safety issue in AV, how do you think about it?
Yeah, I think assessing the safety of an automated driving system is something that no regulator in the world is able to do or has done to date. And I think it's precisely because of what you just said. I mean, companies, of course, spend a lot of time trying to assess the safety of their own technology by running simulations, by doing closed course testing and then testing on the public roads with a safety driver. But it's not until you take the safety driver out and put the vehicle on the road that you can really assess whether it's handling edge cases without that safety driver there as a fallback. So of course, from a regulatory perspective, that creates a dilemma. You could take the approach of saying, well, we're not going to put these vehicles on the road until we're confident that they're safe. But, well, given what we just said, that means you're never going to get these vehicles on the road. Another approach you could take, and I think some American states have taken this, is a laissez-faire approach. Say, let the companies do what they want, and if there are crashes on the road, regulators will act then, and tort law will impose some liability on those companies. That approach has dangers to it, I think, because it's essentially saying, well, everyone else who's on the roads is kind of at the guinea pig in the company's experiment. So NHTSA is used to having a very highly detailed and precise system of standards that regulate automotive safety. So they're called the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, the FMVSS. They date back to a statute from the 1960s. Unfortunately, the FMVSS don't really regulate automated driving safety, and it's not clear how they could for the reasons that we just described. So what NHTSA has been doing is an approach that I think is innovative, and I think it's wise. They're taking a recall-based approach, which is to say they're closely following how the companies are performing on the road. And the way they're following them is they are requiring companies to share any news about crashes with regulators within a relatively short time frame. And all that information is available online. So for those of you who've never been to the website, just Google NHTSA, NHTSA, SGO. That's the standing general order where you can see detailed crash data on every L4 crash and every serious L2 crash that's happened on the public roads in the United States. And then they're taking that data. When they see crashes, even if they're modest crashes that reveal safety concerns, then they're acting as an agency. So take for example, Waymo got in a crash where they ran into a telephone pole, okay? That's a crash that anyone who works on automated driving technology would tell you shouldn't happen. It's a one-vehicle crash. It can't be attributed to human error. And that ultimately resulted in a recall investigation by NHTSA and ultimately a recall of the technology, which meant Waymo updated its software under the direction of NHTSA. So NHTSA has evolved this flexible approach to dealing with the inability to test ex ante. It's neither a pure ex ante or ex post approach. It's a fast response approach that looks at real safety performance on the roads. And I think NHTSA is taking the right approach.
Good. Yeah, thank you. On that, I don't know, Edwin, from your company point of view, how do you take this? And also want to add another flavor. One is this kind of government formal regulation, right? Then there's the insurance making a privileged judgment on what's my risk, what's premium. And then another layer is the whole public sentiment, right? The public one, probably the list, the kind of a rational one, in some sense, is much more emotion on this, right? So think about this. There will be a day AV will kill a person. I think that will happen at some point on this, right? Should we prepare beforehand on this, right? Let's have a realistic expectation. Now, as of last year, we killed about 40,000 people in the United States. If we reduce to 4,000, that's a major contribution AV is having. But having 4,000 people killed by AV, the whole country will revolt against it, right? So how do you reconcile this irrationality here?
That's a good question. So there's a lot in there. You're exactly right about the current framework. The way that we think about regulatory approvals, there's several layers. There's the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards. Our approach here is to work with our partner Toyota. Toyota builds street legal vehicles. Our vehicles are street legal in all 50 states because Toyota says, has done the work to show that they are. That kind of checks the FMVSS button for us. Some other AV companies built their own AVs from scratch, and then they take on the entire burden of Federal Motor Vehicle Safety approvals, which is a drag. In each of the 50 states, you have a patchwork of different regulatory frameworks. In most of them, the burden is generally do some paperwork, but then show that you can obtain sufficient insurance to cover the risks of an accident. And I think this is sort of bringing market forces to bear that, at least in our case, we can't self-insure. We're not big enough to self-insure, so we have to actually convince a third-party insurance company to take on the risk of insuring our vehicles. And if we have a bad safety record, we're not going to be able to do that, or our premiums are going to go through the roof. So I think that actually creates a number of really positive incentives for us to be safe and to constantly be sharing with our insurance coverage companies that we're doing the right thing. And then there's the after the fact. So suppose something happens. This is a place where there's a couple challenges that oftentimes, especially in these more end-to-end kinds of systems, the vehicle did something wrong. Why did it do something wrong? Well, because parameter 3,429,612 was 4, and it should have been 5. And that's not a very satisfying answer to the regulators. They really want to understand, well, okay, you can change that parameter, but how do I know that this isn't going to happen again? How do I know that your vehicle's not going to drive into a telephone pole in the future? And this is the real shortcoming of these one large networks, that they don't provide any introspection into how the system works. So I think that's a key part, that when you're architecting one of these systems, you want to have some degree of explainability so that you can say, hey, this is, if something bad happens, this is why it happened, and then this is what our engineers did to fix it, and we can be sure that now it is fixed. Those are really, really important things. Right. And the final thing I'll add is this recall. This is something that I think we're all kind of scratching our head about, because what does a recall mean when we push new software every week? There's some catching up to do because it doesn't really match the standard, oh, well, the recall is because the ignition switch doesn't have enough spring force. No, this is a very different paradigm where the software is a moving target. Right. It's a tough challenge, open challenge.
Yeah. Let me add one more layer to the discussion, because I totally agree. Of course, we have to assure that vehicles are safe according FMVSS standards, and this is obviously what Volkswagen did since a long time already, which we are also going to assure. Second, we have to assure the system, the SDS, is of course taking the right decisions in their acting. But also there is another layer which I would like to add. We as companies integrating all the technology, we have to also assure the vehicles are safe every single day. I mean, the sensors can be dirty. We have to make sure they are always clean. And by introducing the technology in a very safe and low-speed manner here, we are building that trust in the technology over time. And we make sure by introducing fleets in the beginning and not into private cars in the very beginning, that we can maintain those fleets, we have all the data on the fleets, we can exchange the spare parts whenever necessary, or the parts. We can do predictive maintenance. So there is a lot of more we can do here, other than assuring that the vehicle is FMVSS compliant in the very first step, and that the technology is safe. There is another layer that we are developing that is really important to maintain the fleet safe as a whole as well, and also maintaining the street network our vehicles are able to go, which you cannot control in the best way if you're introducing technology in private cars in the very first step. So that's why I think it's really important to move slowly at the speed of trust, to introduce the technology via RoboTaxis, and eventually, I think everyone might agree here that also, like eventually, very long term, we are all thinking that the technology is also landing in private cars, but that's not there yet, from my perspective.
So use the fleet as a learning process to fine-tune, perfect the system before push to the...
That's one point, but also you can maintain the fleet if you're really taking it as a whole, adding remote guidance technology to the product that every single car has or is also learning from the other cars that are in the fleet.
I see. Any more point add on the safety discussion?
Yeah,
go ahead.
you know, I think Ed makes an interesting point about whether recall is the right name for what NHTSA is doing, right? Because you're not physically taking vehicles into the dealership and having them do maintenance on a part. It's mostly software updates either over the air or when you've got a small fleet of vehicles back at the shop. But I do think it's important to note that these recalls are done under the threat of coercion, right? NHTSA has the statutory authority to ask the Attorney General to order a recall if a company doesn't cooperate. So although all these recalls are in theory voluntary. They're done in the threat of a court-ordered recall, and a company has to declare that their technology is defective in order for the recall to be issued, and that defect determination has some consequences. So let me give you a specific example. So I imagine many of you in the room are familiar with the Benavides case down in Florida, which was just tried to verdict in the last few months, where Tesla right now, it may not survive on appeal, has been ordered to pay $242 million by a federal jury in Florida because of defects in autopilot and the way they contributed to a crash. Now, NHTSA's finding of defect doesn't control the outcome in a products liability case, but the plaintiffs can introduce that defect finding in litigation, and the plaintiff lawyer in Florida did that quite effectively in that case against Tesla. So I do think that there are significant consequences to companies acknowledging a defect because of the effect that it can have in the tort system. So I try and push back against the claim that is often made in the media that this industry is unregulated. The regulation takes an unconventional form in recalls, but I think anyone who's worked at one of these companies knows that NHTSA is watching quite carefully, and they react quite quickly when evidence of unreasonable risk emerges.
For a defined vehicle. John and Buwan later will actually share some of the findings during the conference. Now let's move from the technology safety discussion to a kind of economics deployment discussion here, right? I'd like two of you to share, each of you, what's May Mobility's thinking about the actual deployment, at what point we can really get into the RoboTaxi market, at what point we should really shake the private car, and at what point you will support the public transit, right? And also for Katrin to offer the Volkswagen's perspective as well. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, there's this idea that comes up when, like, where are all the alien civilizations? There's this idea of the great filters. You know, are other civilizations, this is going to be relevant, are other civilizations wiping themselves because of an epidemic, or is it AI that kills them off, or environmental collapse? I think that there's actually two great filters for autonomous vehicle companies. The first great filter is, can you make the car drive itself? And that actually does a lot of pruning in the AV space. But the second great filter is, can you actually build a business out of it? So today, Waymo's got a wonderful product. It's fantastic. They continue to burn $250 million every month. So they've got a long way to go to get through that second great filter. Our strategy has been the number one problem for AV companies is the capital intensity of it. Our strategy has been to be very deliberate in minimizing our capital intensity. So we're not building our own cars. We work with Toyota to build the cars. We're not building our own ride-hail networks. We've announced partnerships with Uber, Lyft, and Grab. We're actually live today in Atlanta. We're launching on Uber in Arlington, Texas in just a couple months. And we haven't said where we're going to announce Grab, but these are live commercial agreements. But one of the key things about partnering with them, yes, you have to do some revenue share, but when you have that fire hose of trip requests coming in, you can drive your deadhead miles down. You can drive your asset utilization up, which makes the business better. So, a vehicle that's sitting around deadheading is not doing anybody any good. But if you have enough trip requests coming in, you can drive down the deadheading miles, drive up the asset utilization, and make your money back. So that's really our strategy, and to be really focused, so we're not spending $250 million a month.
Thank you. Yeah,
I pretty much agree with what you just said. It's about really partnering in that industry. It's not about one winner takes it all. And that you can see that with every single competitor out there right now. And that's the approach we are taking as well. And that's not only true for the partnerships and the companies which are in the industry and collaborating together. That's also true for the modes of transport we are using our RoboTaxis for. So the ID Bus, which is our base vehicle, is a van-style vehicle. It's a larger form factor. So we are able to also integrate into ride-pooling services in Europe, which is very important. The transit system in Europe in general is much more mature than it is here. So I have seen that from many years living in Germany, of course, and now living in the US, it's very different. So it's really important to address the mobility challenges of the cities in a way that it's really enhancing the mobility system and adding a mode of transport that is also necessary for the mobility in the different cities. And that's a very different approach between US and Europe. And therefore also we are partnering much more right now also with PTOs, so public transit companies in Europe right now, to integrate the technology like ride-pooling services in the existing networks. Versus here in the US, the public transport is not as mature. So RoboTaxis and ride-hailing services, and we partner, and we announced we partner with Uber. We are going to use that approach here for the US, but the car and the product is supposed to serve many different modes of transport, and I think that's the key issue here we have to address, that we are not only putting vehicles out there in ride-hailing services, but also being intelligent on how to deploy the services across the different markets based on the mobility needs of the specific city.
On the point of collaborating with public transit agencies and operators, can you give us a bit more on this? In what form you collaborate? Yes.
I can talk a little bit about how we are deploying right now in Hamburg with our sister company Moja with the ride pooling services. So the service they are deploying, it's still manually driven with larger form factors also in Hamburg, and you are able to book the rides also on the public transit agency app. So it's not only that you have to download an Uber or a Moja or a Lyft app, we are really integrating the technology into their systems, and we are offering also white label solutions for PTOs to use the technology we are developing to deploy it in the existing public transit networks. So that is how we are doing it in the city of Hamburg, collaborating with the city, collaborating with the PTO, with the local PTO on site to make sure that we are serving the mobility gaps in the city of Hamburg in that case. And that's how we are also envisioning to deploy our services across different other cities. We just started first testing activities in Berlin, also another city where Berlin is basically also using our white label app to serve customers in the city of Berlin.
Very nice. Before I invite Matt, I want to mention, in the last 10 minutes or so, I'll open it for questions from the audience. We have several volunteers can bring you the mic. Do please prepare some questions that to target on the audience. So for Matt, during our prep call, right, you mentioned the regulation from the mobility system point of view. You said the following, I think is interesting. Anything that's not Waymo you want to promote so that to avoid a single monopoly here, right? To really encourage a richer competition of the industry. Give us your thought on how do you regulate from that aspect?
Well, look, I'll say, as someone who's not being paid by anyone except a small Jewish university in New York City, I have no ties to the industry, and I talk to journalists all the time, in part because they know that I don't have ties to anyone. My sense is that the gap between Waymo and their most credible competitors is staggering. You know, at least years of development, and I would say Tesla is among the furthest back. And my reason for saying that is anything other than an on-road deployment without a safety driver just doesn't tell you anything about the state of the company's technology. And Waymo's done over 100 million miles on the road without a safety driver, and its crashes are a matter of public record. Most other companies, the number of miles they've driven on the public roads without a safety driver, as Ed said, the number of companies that are even in that category is very small, right? But most of the other ones have done a very modest amount. You know, Tesla says that it wants to operate a RoboTaxi, but what it has developed so far is something like a prototype system. You know, I think right now what Tesla's doing is a form of regulatory arbitrage. Their position when you talk to consumers is that we have a RoboTaxi service. This is going to be fully self-driving. But if you look at what they say to regulators, they say this is L2. This is a driver assistance system. And the proof of this is that Tesla is not complying with L4 regulations in California right now. They're only complying with L2 regulations. So if you look at what Tesla's lawyers are saying, all they're saying they have is a driver assistance system. So because of that, I think the possibility of a Waymo monopoly in this space is much more significant than people in the media and in the industry have said. So I think regulation should put a thumb on the scale in favor of competition, because we know that transportation industries across the mobility space are heavily concentrated. I mean, look at TNCs, transportation network companies, the ride-hailing industry, right? We have an Uber-Lyft duopoly in most American cities. And if we have one private company alphabet controlling a large chunk of our transportation system, that's going to give them a huge amount of power over the lives of everyday citizens. So I think we need to protect consumers by encouraging competition, and then if we still have a really concentrated industry, by direct regulation. So let me give you an example of something that I'm worried about: emergency planning. So let's say that RoboTaxis really take off, and many people give up their private vehicle and rely on RoboTaxi networks for their private transportation needs. Okay, what happens when we have a hurricane or we have an earthquake and you don't have a car that you can use anymore to evacuate? And the RoboTaxi company hasn't developed a fleet that can serve the peak demand of a mass evacuation scenario where people are leaving. This is the kind of worry that I think people haven't talked about yet, because they've been focused on, can RoboTaxis succeed? But what if RoboTaxis do succeed and the transportation system is transformed? How can you really trust a private company to protect you? And that's where I think regulation can play more of a role. I would encourage folks in the audience, whenever you see an announcement about a partnership, to remember that all a partnership is an agreement between two companies to issue a press release, right? People have got to be more skeptical about some of these announcements and look to publicly available data in the SGO. Let me say one last thing. One thing we haven't touched on, but I think is critical to the economics, is remote facilitation. Waymo's deployment relies heavily on remote facilitation. And although there's a lot of transparency about crashes, there is very little transparency about how remote facilitation works. If all you're doing is taking a driver out of a taxi and putting that driver in a remote command center, then there's no cost saving. The only way these companies are going to become profitable is the ratio of remote operators to vehicles goes down dramatically. What that ratio is today for Waymo or other companies is not a matter of public record, and it's something that I think journalists and academics need to do a lot more research on, and it's something I'd wish the industry would be a lot more transparent about, because if this industry is going to work, we're going to have to rely less on remote facilitation than we are today.
Do you want us to comment on this? Yeah. So maybe one thing I'll do, I prepare some question on this, right? So we can really get started on this, right? But one thing to avoid the single player monopoly is to make mobility, Volkswagen can survive and be a meaningful competitor in this market, right? So you have much more. In a way, see, the best regulation of Uber is the fact that Lyft exists, right? They have to behave in some ways, right? That's the spirit of the capitalist market on this, right? So we have 7 minutes or so. Let me open for some questions from some of the audience here. Remarks, comments? Yeah, oh, wow, there's a few on this. You have me here and here, yeah.
Hi. So I was interested in your description of the regulatory process, and coming from the perspective of being a federal employee and seeing what's happened with staffing. I'm wondering if you're seeing changes in responsiveness or monitoring with respect to the recall-based approach.
Right. So the recall one, I see a few. Let's gather a few questions. Yeah, Mary here, and then also Robin here.
Just a lot of the conversations around RoboTaxis really focused around passenger vehicles, safeties, and services. Traveling outside the U.S., obviously there are a lot of other applications around RoboTaxis, around delivering of goods and all that. And I'm just curious from the panel's experience, are there differences in the way you would build a product for delivering of goods and different safety factors associated with not having a passenger in the vehicle? And what does that do to different modes of transportation for services?
Great, thanks. Last in this round. Yeah,
just a quick comment, thinking about monopolies and hurricanes. I think the best response is a true, robust, multimodal system. So it's not just cars.
Great, yeah. So to any of this question, you can feel free to respond. Katrin, do you want to start? Yeah.
Let me talk a little bit about transport, maybe. I like the idea of combining also, I talked about multimodality and the product that is being used in different areas and different services, and transport is obviously one of them. I wouldn't say we are building the product in a different way for transport. The van is also a great example, which if you remove the seats, you have a lot of space in the car to also do transportation. One challenge I see in transportation, though, is especially if you're thinking about last mile deliveries, how do you get the parcel or the good to the customer door? And this is, from my perspective, still unsolved. So we are thinking about hub-to-hub connections right now, where our form factor might fit very well, but also there is a market, from my perspective, for even larger vehicles and more truck-style businesses, where I think also here autonomy can help a lot in reducing prices for transportation. Everyone is relying so much on ordering everything. So I think autonomous technology can help a lot on this, although I don't think we should develop a different approach to safety for one or the other, if it's transportation or passenger mobility.
Yeah. We're starting with people moving because that's the better business. There's more margin, more revenue to be earned per trip. And given the higher cost of the vehicles, it just makes sense. That's where we can start today and actually get through that second filter. Over time, absolutely move into other market segments. But it doesn't materially change the safety requirements, because the most vulnerable people are the people outside the vehicle, pedestrians and cyclists and things like that. So even a package delivery robot needs to live up to a very high level of safety standards, almost indistinguishable. In terms of getting packages, I'm a big advocate of Catapult. I think that's going to be the future. Just
It sometimes feels like this today already if I get my Amazon stuff.
And then I also think that in terms of the public transit integration, this is one where we're focused right now working with Ride Hail, where the immediate goal is to replace personally owned car trips with autonomous vehicles. But if that's the end of the story, that's also a catastrophe. If we just replace one-to-one every trip with another car, maybe we help the parking problem, but we're not doing anything about congestion. So a key part of our story is, how do we work with public transit agencies so that we can make a multimodal trip better than taking the car that's in your garage. And we actually got our start in the B2G space, selling into public transit agencies, helping them modernize their bus lines where they were underutilized or not accessible. So that's definitely an important part of where we want to go.
Yeah, can you tell a bit more about that? I'd like to see how you work with the transit agencies to really promote this. Can you give us a little bit?
Yeah, so if you are in a relatively low density area, like Ann Arbor, the probability that you're going to have two people going to and from the same location at the same time gets very, very low. So the correct kind of the optimal solution for that is a vehicle that's going to go to one house and take them directly to their destination. If you are in a much more congested area, more populated area, where a lot of people are going downtown, now it starts to look kind of like what Via was doing in New York City, where you might go and collect a bunch of people with a larger form factor vehicle, and then go drop them downtown, or even take them to the train station and allow the train station to whiz them downtown at 80 kilometers an hour. And I think there's actually, where I start to get really excited is, what are the long-term implications of autonomous vehicles on public transit networks? Today, if you are building a subway station, you're going to space your stations away about one walkway. So there's these little 400-meter funnels where you want people to be able to walk to the next station. Well, what if you really had ubiquitous, easy-to-use last-mile transportation? Then the funnels could be larger. Well, now the stations could be farther away. That's less infrastructure costs, and also means shorter trip times, because the trains wouldn't have to stop so much. So I actually see a future here where we can make getting downtown on the bus, on rail, a better experience than rail is today by just streamlining that process. But it's really hard. We need a multimodal trip to outcompete the car that's in the garage. That's super hard, and it's going to require partnership.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
I just want to say one thing about this question about regulation and the current political climate. So I was very worried at the beginning of the second Trump administration, because near the end of the Biden administration, NHTSA had created this Office of Automation Safety, and a bunch of those individuals were laid off in the DOGE cuts at the beginning of the Trump administration. I have been pleasantly surprised by NHTSA's regulation during the Trump era, and I think part of the reason is the man who replaced me at my old company, now was general counsel of what became Motional, Peter Simshauser, is currently the general counsel, or the chief counsel of NHTSA. And Simshauser, I think, is not a hack. He's not a total partisan. He takes his job seriously. The evidence for this is the industry tried to water down the standing general order. There was a push to do that in the beginning of the second Trump administration, and they only watered it down a little. The gist of the crash reporting regime is still in place, and I think that's in part because Simhauser's got a spine, and he's doing his job so far. I think the open question is what's going to happen with a lot of these recall investigations, right? Tesla's under 3 different recall investigations right now, and the last time that NHTSA had a recall of Tesla Autopilot, I think it was kind of a missed opportunity. They didn't require Tesla to limit Autopilot to its operational design domain, which I think is unforgivable. It's not just me saying that. The NTSB also took that position. So I think NHTSA's role in the next few years will depend a lot on how these recall investigations are handled.
Wow, that's perfect timing. I just conclude by saying I think AV is moving from it works to it matters towards this safe, clean, and inclusive mobility system. Please join me. Thank you, the panel, of this brilliant discussion. Really wonderful.
Okay, so thank you.